The woman had just returned home from work when her husband accused her of losing a screw from the model. Her expression alone made it clear what was about to happen. He turned and slapped her, knocking her to the floor. Then he violently yanked her hair. Finally, he shoved her into the bathtub filled with ice cubes. He doused her entire body with the showerhead. Immediately after, he pushed her out onto the balcony. Miho told his wife, "If you can't take it, jump off here." Before Yeonju could respond, he locked her out on the balcony. She scrambled to her feet, desperately trying to get him to open the glass door. No matter how she screamed or begged, he showed no sign of responding. Faced with this heartless husband, Yeonju felt utterly hopeless. She grabbed a bath towel and wrapped it around herself for warmth. At that moment, Yeonju felt herself slowly sinking into a bottomless abyss, her heart aching so deeply she could barely breathe. Perhaps freezing to death on the balcony would be a release for her. The next day, they were scheduled to attend a trip at a friend's villa. No one knew how Yeonju had endured that night. Miho, acting as if nothing had happened, asked her if she had been cold last night and even offered a feigned apology. Yeonju remained silent. Her heart had long since turned to ashes. She had considered divorce, but her husband refused outright, partly because of his extreme possessiveness and controlling nature, and partly because her best friend Hyami was the daughter of a chaebol. Hyami's husband, Si-hoon, happened to be the head of the group's procurement department. Miho's company was on the verge of collapse. He desperately needed this connection to secure orders. Thus, he pressured Yeonju to invite Hyami's family on a group vacation, though Hyami readily agreed. The relationship between her and Yeonju wasn't as harmonious as imagined. Later, the two women took a stroll near the villa, chatting about everyday matters. By chance, they discovered an abandoned wooden hut alongside a long dry well. This very well would plant the seeds for the unfolding drama. Deep down, Hyami looked down on Yeonju. That evening at the vacation villa, Miho fawned over Hyami, pouring her wine. Under the influence, Hyami mercilessly humiliated Yeonju. Yeonju, pushed beyond endurance, finally fought back. Witnessing this, Miho's rage flared. He followed Yeonju into the bathroom. Miho expertly grabbed his wife's hair and slammed her head against the sink without hesitation. Yeonju collapsed and lost consciousness. Miho coldly returned to his room to sleep, as if nothing had happened. Lying on the floor, Yeonju had no idea her life was about to undergo an earth-shattering change. After an unknown period, Yeonju awoke and returned alone to the bedroom. She sat motionless on the bed, her mind blank as if she'd long grown accustomed to this existence. She strained to recall anything worth clinging to in life, but found nothing, so she wandered into the pitch-black forest like a walking corpse. A river lay before her, yet she showed no sign of stopping. As Si-hoon struggled to save her, a tremendous crash echoed nearby. Their gaze locked onto a faint light. White smoke billowed from the source. Following the glow, they discovered a minivan that had plunged off a cliff. Si-hoon frantically pulled out his phone to call for help. Just then, Yeonju noticed the white box was filled entirely with 50,000 won bills. Upon closer inspection, she counted over a dozen such boxes. Si-hoon examined the bills. They were genuine. Seeing such a vast amount of cash for the first time, Si-hoon felt overwhelmed. Yeonju, however, remained composed. "This is definitely dirty money," she stated. She immediately wanted to claim it as her own. With this fortune, she could reinvent herself, restart her life, and escape her abusive husband once and for all. Si-hoon hesitated for a moment, his resolve wavering. He demanded to know where Yeonju planned to hide the money. From this point on, they were accomplices. They counted it all a staggering 9 billion won in cash. To make transport easier, Yeonju told Si-hoon to go back to their place and get the car. When she brought all the boxes upstairs, she spotted bloodstains on a rock nearby. Strangely, the driver had clearly died in the opposite direction. Following the trail, she discovered another person hidden behind a rock. He was clearly severely injured. As Yeonju opened her phone to call emergency services, she hesitated. In that moment of indecision, the man gasped "brother" before slipping away. Yeonju never told Si-hoon about this man, to avoid any tracking devices in the boxes. Si-hoon brought numerous trash bags. They stuffed the cash into the bags while wiping fingerprints off the box. After tidying the scene, they transported the money deep into the forest and dumped it all into this dry well. To ease Yeonju's guilt, Si-hoon deliberately gave her husband a large order, just as Yeonju had suspected. The news reports made no mention of the cash from the accident, but Daniel, the owner of that money, wouldn't let it go. Daniel immediately reprimanded his men. His fury wasn't over the lost money. He feared his business would be exposed. If the information leaked, the financial empire he'd painstakingly built would collapse instantly. Early the next morning, Daniel sent men to find Taiwa's brother, Tae-jun. After beating him, they demanded to know where the cash was. They then informed him about Taiwa's car accident the previous night. Seeing Taejun's skeptical and agitated reaction unlike someone who knew about it, they released him. Tae-jun was blindfolded and dumped on the street. At that moment, he still clung to the hope that his brother might be alive. Desperate, he begged onlookers to lend him a phone to contact Tae-woo, but no one was willing to lend their phone to such a frantic, disheveled man. Barefoot, Tae-jun raced home with all his might, yet he was still summoned to the morgue to identify his brother's body. At the funeral, Tae-woo made a vow before his brother's urn. He swore he would punish those responsible for his brother's death. Tae-jun had once been a detective. He quickly obtained records from colleagues identifying the company that owned the accident vehicle. Soon, Tae-jun tracked down Daniel's company, yet here, he found no leads whatsoever. He only learned that his brother Tae-woo had worked in financial management at this firm. Tae-jun believed his brother's role in such a position must have hidden motives. He didn't waste time chatting with these people but headed straight to the crime scene to search for clues. But after searching for a long time, he still found nothing. He decided to visit a nearby vacation villa, hoping to uncover some clues. Yeonju planned to find a safe place to hide the cash. Unfortunately, not long after driving off, her tire was punctured. Just as Yeonju was at a loss, she happened to encounter Tae-jun. Faced with Tae-jun's kind offer to help, Yeonju couldn't refuse. At that moment, she noticed through the car window that the zipper on her luggage bag was open. If Tae-jun discovered it, all her efforts would be for naught. Fortunately, the angle was opposite his line of sight, and luckily, he didn't notice. While Tae-jun changed the spare tire, Yeonju slipped into the car and zipped it up. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. After changing the tire, Tae-jun casually asked Yeonju if she had seen anything about last night's accident. Yeonju calmly replied she'd only learned about it from the news. Though Tae-jun didn't press further, Yeonju still felt uneasy inside. Si-hoon was given a deadline by his father-in-law to repay the embezzled company funds. Thinking of the cash stashed in the dry well, he felt no urgency, but when he arrived there that night, he discovered all the money was gone. He called Yeonju's phone, but no one answered, so he went to the building where Yeonju lived and waited there all night. Only after Miho left for work did he go upstairs to find Yeonju. It was then he learned Yeonju had moved the money to a safe place. Si-hoon demanded 5 billion won up front, but Yeonju refused. With the money in Yeonju's hands, Si-hoon was powerless. Fearing he might get nothing if he pushed her too far, he had no choice but to compromise. After Si-hoon left, Yeonju rushed to the mall and bought a counterfeit detector. She then went to the home of her former employer, where she had worked as a cleaner. The employer had given her the keys before leaving the country, asking her to clean the place every few days. Being meticulous, she donned gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. She then emptied all the bills onto the table and began counting them. Just as she stared blankly at the money, Si-hoon suddenly called to say a police officer named Tae-jun had approached him with questions. Tae-jun claimed to have found Si-hoon's contact information in the guest list of a vacation villa. Feeling uneasy, Si-hoon dismissed Tae-jun by claiming he had a meeting. At this point, Si-hoon was unaware that Tae-jun's police ID was actually fake. He urgently told Yeonju they had to move the money to a safe place immediately. Si-hoon's tone didn't sound like he was joking. For safety's sake, Yeonju gave Si-hoon the address. When Si-hoon arrived at the parking lot, Tae-jun spotted him. Tae-jun sensed something was off. He followed Si-hoon all the way to the underground parking garage of Yeonju's apartment complex. Unfortunately, 2 cars blocked the entrance. Inside the garage, Tae-jun searched extensively but couldn't locate Si-hoon's vehicle. Instead, he unexpectedly spotted a small white car. Recognizing the familiar scratch marks, he confirmed it was the same white car he'd seen near yesterday's accident scene. Just as he snapped a photo, a woman passed by. Na-yeon, the owner of the house where Yeonju hid the money. She'd returned early from abroad. Yeonju remained unaware. Meanwhile, Sihun was utterly intoxicated by the scent of the cash pile. Desperate, Sihun tried to grab several stacks of bills, but Yeonju stopped him. Though they were accomplices, Sihun had completely lost his mind. As they argued fiercely, the door lock suddenly clicked. Faced with such a large pile of cash, Yeonju had no idea how to explain it. Naeon pulled out her phone to call the police, but Sihun stopped her. In the struggle, Naeon slapped him across the face. Just an hour earlier, Sihun had been slapped by his wife. Now he was slapped by this stranger. His rage instantly boiled over, and he shoved Naeon violently. Her head slammed hard against the sharp edge of the fish tank, and she collapsed to the floor. Shaking, Sihun checked her pulse. A faint breath still lingered. 2 people had already died over this fortune. She couldn't bear another death, but Sihun vehemently denied responsibility, blaming Yeonju for everything. If Yeonju hadn't taken it upon herself to hide the money here, none of this would have happened. Sihun roared furiously. Yeonju, however, remained calm. Call an ambulance first, she said. If the police got involved, there'd be no explanation for this pile of cash. Sihun lowered his head again, trying to persuade her, but Yeonju was resolute and dialed the number. Sihun grabbed the luggage bag and started stuffing the money inside. Taejun, staking out the parking lot, spotted Sihun dragging the luggage. Suddenly, he recalled the identical bag he'd glimpsed in the trunk while fixing Yeonju's flat tire yesterday. Convinced the bag contained the missing cash, he followed Sihun all the way to an abandoned factory. Sihun stuffed the entire bag into an electrical distribution box. He then replaced the lock on the factory gate with a new one, testing it repeatedly to ensure it was secure. Only after confirming everything was safe did he drive away with peace of mind. At the hospital, Yeonju pondered for a long time. Unsure what other mishaps might arise, she began questioning whether her choice had been the right one. Just as she returned to the entrance of her apartment complex, Taejun found her. To lower Yeonju's guard, Taejun immediately revealed he wasn't a real police officer. He wasn't interested in the money. He only wanted to uncover the truth behind his brother Taewa's car accident. But Yeonju insisted she knew nothing. Taejun left his business card, telling her to call if she remembered anything. Back home, Yeonju hid alone in the bathroom, staring at Taejun's card. She pondered for a long time. Ultimately, reason overcame desire. She resolved to turn herself in within 2 days to end this absurd ordeal. Before surrendering, she wanted to visit Naeon in the hospital one last time. Yeonju's life always seemed this way just when she tried to seize an opportunity. It ended up being for nothing. She held Naeon's hand, expressing her deepest apologies. After Yeonju left, Naeon regained consciousness. But just then, a stranger in white entered the ward. Naeon gazed at the drawing her son had made on the hospital bed. She longed to touch it one last time. Yet, in the end, she couldn't fulfill that wish. She shed the last tear of her life. By the time people discovered her, it was already too late. Yeonju stood at the doorway, witnessing the entire resuscitation process. Panicked, she suddenly recalled the suspicious-looking man she'd encountered on the staircase earlier. The only person Yeonju could think of was Sihun. Sihun had just ended a phone call and now wore a devilish grin. Furious, Yeonju rushed to the parking lot and confronted Sihun. Sihun snapped impatiently. "Didn't you start all this? Now you show up pretending to be the good guy? Don't forget we're accomplices." Yeonju was speechless. She suddenly realized she hadn't opened a treasure chest, but a Pandora's box. Forget enjoying this fortune, there was no way out now. Sihun drove away. Yeonju slumped to the ground, lost in thought for a long time. Though spilled water couldn't be retrieved, she still wanted to salvage her conscience. Staring at the tires of her little white car, she suddenly thought of Taejun. Taejun had once told her he knew where Sihun hid the money, and she possessed something Taejun needed, the key Taewoo had given her before his death. She called Taejun and proposed in exchange. Just then, another demon appeared, Miho. Furious that Sihun's company abruptly cancelled their partnership, he returned home to find Yeonju on the phone. Yeonju glanced at her husband's most cherished ship model, and swiftly picked it up, smashing it against another model. To Miho, these 2 models were more precious than his own life. He rushed over to inspect the damage. In that moment, Yeonju seized the chance to run toward the door. Taejun heard Yeonju's screams over the phone. Without hesitation, He sped his car towards Seoyeon's house. Yeonju awoke from the pain to find herself locked in the freezer by her husband. Her skin was already frosted over, and her fingers had nearly lost all sensation. Yeonju curled up tightly, trying desperately to stay warm. The refrigeration system continued to pump freezing air relentlessly inside. Just then, Taejun finally arrived at Yeonju's doorstep. Miho opened the door and calmly pretended he knew nothing. Taejun flashed his police badge, stating he needed Yeonju's assistance with an investigation. Before Miho could react, Taejun forced his way inside. He searched every room meticulously but found no sign of Yeonju. However, in the living room, he noticed a suitcase on the floor. The clothes inside confirmed it belonged to Yeonju. Turning around, he spotted the overturned ship model. Just then, Miho drew his golf club. Taejun subdued him in seconds and demanded Yeonju's whereabouts, but Miho refused to say where she was. Meanwhile, Yeonju had regained consciousness for the second time. She knew she couldn't slip back into unconsciousness this time. She might never wake up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she pulled herself up. Then she spotted the crab claws in the phone box. She selected the sharpest one. Yeonju intended to use this method to stay awake, yet her brief lucidity couldn't sustain her climb to the cold storage door. She slipped back into unconsciousness. Just then, a sliver of light seeped through the door's crack. Miho finally couldn't withstand Taejun's interrogation and revealed Yeonju's location. After being rescued, Yeonju slept in Taejun's car. When she awoke, Taejun told her they had arrived at the factory where Sihoon hid the money. They approached the factory entrance, and Taejun used bolt cutters to sever the chains. Yeonju quickly found the two large bundles of cash. Meanwhile, Sihoon, convinced he was now a billionaire, spoke to his wife in a completely different tone. He felt he no longer had to obey her every word. He blurted out everything he'd wanted to say but dared not over the years. After venting, he got up to go to the factory to check on the cash, but when he arrived, he was stunned. Sihoon concluded Yeonju must have taken the money, but he had already fallen out with Yeonju. With no other choice to avoid a disastrous outcome, Sihoon sought out his wife again, begging for forgiveness, but Hyami walked away without looking back. By this point, Sihoon had no dignity left for the sake of money. He planned to make peace with Yeonju. After connecting the call, before she could speak, he hurriedly apologized. He then mentioned the cash again and requested a meeting to discuss properly. The person answering the call was none other than Miho. Meanwhile, Yeonju sought out Grandma Lee to help launder money. While working as a cleaner, she'd heard rumors about Grandma Lee's once powerful connections, but after falling on hard times, Grandma Lee couldn't repay her high-interest loans, and creditors were about to seize her house. Yeonju told Grandma Lee, "If you have a way to launder money, I can help you pay off your debts and save your house." Though Grandma Lee was well past 50, she still wanted to keep her home and agreed to Yeonju's proposal. Grandma Lee then led Yeonju to her secret room, assuring her the money would be absolutely safe there. Yeonju asked why Grandma Lee didn't question the source of the cash. Grandma Lee replied that the person who spent the money was its true owner. She then dialed her creditor Matt. Hearing the large sum, Matt immediately agreed. Soon after, Yeonju went to meet him alone. Matt demanded a 20% handling fee, but Yeonju insisted on 5%. The two parted on bad terms. When Yeonju went to give Taejun the key, Taejun mentioned knowing someone who could help with money laundering. Unbeknownst to them, another party now coveted this fortune. Miho confronted Sihoon directly, threatening him with the call recording. Sihoon lured Miho to a secluded spot and meticulously recounted the cash details. His aim was to team up with Miho to seize the money from Yeonju. He promised they'd split the money evenly once it was secured, but Miho wasn't satisfied. He wanted 70%. If Sihoon refused, he threatened to expose the whole scheme. With no bargaining chips, Sihoon had no choice but to agree. To find Yeonju, Sihoon retrieved surveillance footage from the factory security room and noted the license plate number. He quickly traced the vehicle's details and shared all the information with Miho. The owner was Young-sik. The car Taejun had been driving all along belonged to him. He was also the person Taejun had mentioned to Yeonju as being able to help with money laundering. Meanwhile, Yeonju had already found Young-sik and briefly discussed the process with him. Just then, Young-sik received a call from one of his underlings saying Taejun was in trouble. He hurriedly went downstairs with Yeonju to check on the situation. Just then, Miho arrived at the door. Yeonju was cornered in the elevator by her husband wielding a stun gun, after being knocked unconscious by the shock. Yeonju was dragged back home by her husband. He then bound her to a chair with duct tape. When Yeonju regained consciousness, she struggled, begging him to let her go. Miho grinned and said, "Want me to shut you up too?" Only then did Yeonju stop screaming. Miho pulled a thick pumice stone from a drawer. He then stripped Yeonju's socks off her feet. He pressed her again, demanding where the cash was hidden. Yeonju refused to give up this chance to change her life. To muffle her screams from the neighbors, Miho stuffed something into her mouth. Then he began rubbing the pumice stone relentlessly against Yeonju's feet. Minutes later, Miho threatened Yeonju, "If you don't reveal the cash's location now, you'll regret it." But Yeonju showed no fear at Miho's threats. Miho pulled out a band-aid and stuck it on Yeonju's injured foot, offering a feigned apology. Finally, he told Yeonju they'd split the money 50-50. That way you can forget the pain and divorce quietly. He gave Yeonju 5 minutes to consider. To Yeonju, a quiet divorce was a chance for rebirth. Keeping half the money was enough for her, so she agreed and gave Miho the address. Miho then drove to the hiding spot, but when he arrived at the dry well Yeonju had described, it was empty. Only then did he realize Yeonju had deceived him. Miho immediately turned his car around to head back. Meanwhile, Yeonju had slowly maneuvered herself and the chair under the table. Using every ounce of strength, she kicked the table leg, trying to knock the small knife off the surface. Just as she was about to succeed, a teacup beside her fell first. At that moment, she heard someone shouting outside. Sehun had been frantically searching for Miho, because after providing him with information, Miho wouldn't answer his calls. Worried Miho might pocket the money alone, he rushed over. Yeonju tried to scream for help, but her mouth was tightly sealed with tape, leaving her utterly voiceless. In that critical moment, she noticed the broken teacup shards before her. She quickly pressed her lips against the sharpest edge of a shard and began sliding them back and forth. Just as Sehun was about to turn away, she finally made a sound. Sehun suddenly recognized Yeonju's voice. He immediately pressed his ear against the door, listening intently. With great effort, Yeonju managed to say the door lock code. Sehun berated Miho for treating Yeonju this way. Deep down, Yeonju knew Sehun was a man who wouldn't get out of bed without a profit. He must have been the one who told Miho about the money, so she said nothing. After being untied, Yeonju went to the balcony and saw Miho just pulling up. The two hurriedly fled the scene. She'd rather split the money with Sehun than with Miho, so Sehun chose to side with Yeonju again. He was just a wind-blown reed, swaying whichever way the wind blew. To avoid encountering the pregnant woman on the first floor, they chose the stairs, but they hadn't anticipated Miho would think of this too. He also opted to take the stairs up. Fortunately, when they reached the 5th floor, Yeonju spotted Miho through a crack. They tried to switch to the elevator, but it was too late. Yeonju pressed the button and hid with Sehun around the corridor corner. When Miho reached that floor, he noticed the motion-activated lights suddenly went off. Shouldn't they have just turned on? He concluded someone must have passed by, possibly Yeonju, so he pretended to ascend while slowly creeping toward the corner. Yeonju seemed to catch on to his little trick. Just then, the elevator doors opened. Yeonju dashed inside without hesitation, but Sehun was a split second too late. Miho grabbed his shirt. As they struggled, both tumbled to the floor. Yeonju seized the chance to slam the elevator doors shut, leaning against the elevator walls. She finally breathed a sigh of relief. Downstairs, she happened to catch a ride away with a delivery driver. Watching Yeonju's receding figure, Sehun and Miho began trading complaints. Yeonju was safe for now, but Taejun had been dealt a blow 2 hours earlier. All because, while investigating his brother's death, he'd called Pete one of Daniel's men. He'd asked Pete how much cash was actually missing, because Yeonju had told him the cash she found was only 9 billion won. Pete asked Taejun, puzzled, what he meant. Taejun suddenly realized he shouldn't have asked that question, so he hung up without answering. But Pete wasn't stupid. He guessed Taejun must have uncovered some clue to ask that, so he sent someone to tail Taejun. Sure enough, Taejun used the key Yeonju gave him to find a storage company. Using the numbers on the key tag, he directly located the matching locker. Inside was a document folder containing a USB drive and some photos. It turned out Tae-woo had been investigating Pete all along. To understand why his brother was investigating Pete, he rushed home to examine the USB drive's contents. But before he could reach upstairs, Pete, who had been lying in wait, blocked him in the hallway. Tae-joon confronted Pete, demanding if he was the mastermind behind everything. Pete avoided a direct answer, concerned only with who had given Tae-joon the locker key. To protect Yeonju, Tae-joon refused to say anything. A physical confrontation ensued. Outnumbered, Tae-joon was struck from behind with a club. He was then taken to a car junkyard. The photos and USB drive on Tae-joon were confiscated. Pete proceeded to burn them one by one. The USB drive's contents were encrypted, however, and he couldn't crack it. He could only keep pressing for who gave Tae-joon the key. Deep down, Tae-joon knew exactly what would happen to Yeonju if he revealed her whereabouts. Gritting his teeth, he remained utterly silent. Seeing Tae-joon's stubborn resistance, Pete signaled his men to tow the car to the scrap area. Then, with the claw of an excavator, they began smashing the vehicle piece by piece. To protect Yeonju, Tae-joon never uttered a single word. Even as he lost consciousness, Pete had no choice but to dump him in a concrete pit at an abandoned factory, posting guards to watch him around the clock. Yeonju remained unaware that Tae-joon would rather die than reveal her whereabouts for her safety. That night, Yeon-sik called Yeonju to inform her that Tae-joon had been captured by Pete, one of Daniel's men. After hanging up, Yeonju sat in Grandma Lee's secret room, staring at the stacks of cash for a long time. When Pete arrived, he tossed Tae-joon a bottle of water. Tae-joon told Pete he'd reveal who gave him the key, but only on one condition. Pete must truthfully recount what happened to Tae-woo on the night of the accident. Pete sighed, admitting he'd long suspected Tae-woo was investigating him. That's why on the night of the crash, he'd ordered Tae-woo to change the delivery route, but his real intent was to eliminate Tae-woo. He ambushed the area all night with his men but never saw Tae-woo. He only learned of Tae-woo's accident the next morning. Tae-joon agreed, but insisted on personally leading them to Tae-woo. Yeon-sik and Yeonju arrived at Daniel's company with 50 billion won in cash. They didn't know Daniel was unaware Pete had captured Tae-joon. Daniel also assumed Yeon-sik's visit couldn't be serious business, so he had his secretary make them wait while he played golf in his office. He never imagined that those few golf swings would send the 5 billion won back to Yeonju, because something unexpected happened with Tae-joon. On the road, Tae-joon spotted a pile of construction debris ahead and devised an escape plan. What they didn't know was that Tae-joon's nickname during his time as a detective was Madman. After successfully escaping, Tae-joon immediately called Yeon-sik. Yeon-sik figured that since Tae-joon was safe, there was no need to return the money to Daniel. Just then, Daniel emerged. After all, Yeon-sik had been through the ringer for years. Though terrified, he managed to bluff his way past Daniel without incident. An hour later, Yeon-sik and Yeonju found Tae-joon. When they returned to Tae-joon's residence, they were unaware someone was secretly watching them. It turned out Miho had accidentally discovered Tae-joon's place while tailing Yeon-sik. He had installed several cameras and listening devices in Tae-joon's room. Though the situation grew increasingly dangerous, Tae-joon didn't try to convince Yeonju to give up the money. Instead, he urged her to take the cash and flee immediately. Their entire conversation was overheard by Miho, who was lurking downstairs. To gather more clues, Miho secretly installed a tracking device on Tae-joon's car. That night, Yeonju called Tae-joon from Grandma Lee's house, perhaps driven by guilt over Tae-woo's death. She told Tae-joon she wanted to investigate his death together. Faced with Yeonju's persistence, Tae-joon reluctantly agreed. The next day, they arrived at the path Pete had mentioned. Just as Yeonju was about to climb down into the ditch to help, she slipped. Fortunately, Tae-joon reacted quickly and caught her. To work more efficiently, they split up to search for clues. Yeonju discovered a phone box in a pile of trash and found a broken tracking device on top of it. As Tae-joon scanned the area for other clues, a passerby walked by. The man immediately left after seeing the phone box in Tae-joon's hands. Tae-joon chased after him, demanding if he'd taken the money from the box. "What else did you see that night?" But no matter how Tae-joon pressed him, the man refused to speak. Unable to watch any longer, Yeonju picked up a nearby shovel. Fearing for his motorcycle, The man finally revealed everything he witnessed that night. Passing by that evening, he saw a van parked here. A man got out, unloaded a phone box, and tossed it by the roadside. This led to an argument with the driver. After that, the two drove away. Learning this detail, Taejun immediately sought out Pete to ask whose man the driver really was, because a driver alone wouldn't have the nerve to clash with Taewoo. Pete told Taejun that the person behind the driver was the true owner of this cash. At that moment, Taejun's eyes filled with fear, and he began to regret investigating this case. Yeonju divided the money into 3 equal boxes. During dinner that night, she asked Grandma Lee if there were other ways to launder money. The seasoned Grandma Lee told her money laundering wasn't entirely impossible. Finding a large, well-established company would do the trick. When large companies were mentioned, Yeonju immediately thought of Hyami. So early the next morning, she sought out Hyami. Hyami was puzzled but reluctantly agreed. Yeonju then told Hyami not to ask questions since the situation was sudden and absurd. Yeonju returned to Naeon's home. Seeing the fish tank where Naeon had met her end, she felt a pang of sadness. Sehun arrived, demanding Yeonju split the money as originally planned. Yeonju said she could divide it, but only on one condition. You can only take 1/3. The remaining 1/3 is for Naeon's son. If you refuse, you won't get a single penny. Greedy Sehun vehemently objected, insisting on half. He even pushed Yeonju in a fit of rage. Fortunately, Naeon's tragedy wasn't repeated. Yeonju calmed herself and told him she'd leave after handling the money. Sehun had no choice but to agree. The next day, Yeonju went to a mall and deposited Sehun's share into a locker. She then called Sehun to give him the locker's code. Yeonju also informed him this phone would be deactivated immediately. Sehun hung up, overcome with excitement, and rushed to the mall. When he arrived full of anticipation, he was stunned once more. Sehun felt Yeonju had deceived him again and was furious. Hyami had someone retrieve the surveillance footage from Naeon's front door. She discovered Yeonju had appeared on the day Naeon was involved in the incident, and the second person to show up was none other than Sehun. The third person to enter was Naeon. Not long after, Sehun fled in a panic, carrying 2 luggage bags. At this moment, Hyami remained remarkably calm upon seeing this scene. She even calmly called Yeonju and informed her everything was arranged. She set up a meeting at a Western restaurant, instructing Yeonju to bring the money that afternoon. Meanwhile, Miho faced foreclosure after failing to repay his mortgage, yet he remained unconcerned. Having intercepted a crucial lead through surveillance, Yeonju would deliver 3 billion won to Hyami at a Western restaurant that afternoon. That afternoon, Miho followed Taejun and Yeonju to the restaurant. To be safe, Yeonju decided to go upstairs alone to meet Hyami first. Only after confirming everything was okay would she have Taejun bring the money inside. Miho devised a plan to distract Taejun. He called the restaurant front desk and lied, claiming to be a regular customer. Learning Yeonju was in trouble, Taejun hurriedly got out of the car and rushed toward the restaurant. Only upon seeing Yeonju did he realize there was no actual issue. Taejun realized he'd been tricked and hurried back. By then, Miho had already pried open the trunk with tools. Just as he was about to retrieve the box, Sehun appeared. Sehun had also followed Yeonju here with his crew. With no choice, Miho had to hide. Sehun then spotted Taejun's car and began walking toward it. Just as he was about to discover Miho, Taejun and Yeonju arrived. Finding no money in the storage locker, Sehun came looking for Yeonju. Sehun angrily accused Yeonju, saying there was no money in the locker at all. But Yeonju insisted Sehun was just greedy taking the money and then claiming it wasn't there. Just as the two were about to come to blows, Yeonju told Sehun, Hyami is upstairs. Learning his wife was upstairs, Sehun had no choice but to retreat. Miho, hiding nearby, also retreated back to the car. Meanwhile, Hyami upstairs remained remarkably calm, as if she had seen through everything. The crisis was defused just like that. That evening, Taejun drove Yeonju back to Grandma Lee's residence. Yeonju once again retrieved her share of the money. While Yeonju was away, Miho posed as a volunteer to provide housekeeping services for Grandma Lee. He also discovered the secret hiding place for the money. To find the key, he took a photo of the lock with his phone. Miho then attempted to extract the lock key from Grandma Lee. The seasoned Grandma Lee sensed something was off about Miho. She pressed him on the name of his supervisor. Miho made up a name on the spot, fooling Grandma Lee. Grandma Lee had only been testing him. How would she know these people's names? So she let her guard down. When Yanju returned that evening, she noticed the table had been disturbed. She asked Grandma Lee if anyone had visited. Grandma Lee told her a volunteer had visited during the day, just looked around, and left. Yanju immediately returned to her room and opened the suitcase. Fortunately, the money was still there, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Over the next few days, Miho came several times while Yanju was away. Believing he had become familiar with Grandma Lee, he prepared to act. After helping Grandma Lee to the bathroom, he began rummaging through the room, searching everywhere for the key to the secret room. He searched high and low but found nothing. Just then, he suddenly spotted the key to the secret room hanging in plain sight. Miho, unable to contain his excitement upon grabbing the key, hurriedly opened the secret room door and finally saw the coveted red suitcase he'd been longing for. But when he opened the suitcase, he froze in shock. It turned out Grandma Lee had seen through Miho's scheme all along, and before this, she had already instructed Yanju to transfer all the money. Furious, Miho began frantically searching the secret room, but after a thorough search, he found nothing. By this point, Miho had lost his mind. He grabbed a vase nearby and rushed out of the secret room. He charged viciously toward Grandma Lee, who was in the bathroom. Grandma Lee had collapsed on the floor due to a heart attack recurrence, still convulsing. After regaining his composure, Miho still took Grandma Lee to the hospital, but he had no intention of giving up on that money. When Yanju returned and saw the room in utter disarray, she felt deeply guilty. She never imagined this money would drag so many people into trouble. She hurriedly retrieved all the cash from a water-filled barrel. Meanwhile, Daniel had subdued Yongsik and was pressing him for the identity of the woman in the photo. Though terrified, Yongsik's loyalty to Taejun was unwavering. Even beaten beyond recognition, he refused to name Yanju. At the critical moment, Taejun arrived. No matter how many of them there are, let's fight first, he told Daniel. Take it out on me. Release Yongsik first. But Taejun still refused to reveal the woman in the photo. Daniel then ordered his men to bring out a dagger, intending to deal with Taejun personally. Just then, a call came in. It was Yanju calling Daniel. She had already learned that Daniel had captured Taejun and was investigating the missing cash, so she arrived at the dock carrying a suitcase full of cash. If that money fell into the water, Daniel wouldn't be able to account for it to his boss, so he had no choice but to agree to Yanju's terms and release Taejun first. Watching Taejun walk toward her, Yanju desperately wanted to run to him and embrace him, but in the end, she couldn't bring herself to take that step. Taejun's greatest concern now was how to ensure Yanju's safe escape. He planned to start a fight and let Yanju flee during the chaos, but Yanju refused. She insisted this trouble stemmed from her and she would resolve it herself. She had already braced herself for the worst. Before leaving, she gazed deeply at Taejun and whispered, "You are the most important person in my life." Faced with Yanju's resolve, Taejun said nothing more. He could only escape first and find a way to rescue her later. Daniel, watching Yanju, the one who'd gotten him into this mess, raised his arm and slapped her across the face. Seeing this, Taejun felt a sharp pang of pain. Daniel brought Yanju back to the company and counted the remaining cash in the suitcase. He then demanded to know where the rest of the money was. Yanju responded by making a demand. She wanted a reward. She argued that if she hadn't secretly taken the money, Daniel would already be under police interrogation about the fund's origin. Daniel not only refused but slapped Yanju again. Just then, Miho burst in carrying a pesticide tank. It turned out Miho had been following Yanju since she left for the dock. He barged in and told Daniel he could help recover the remaining money, as long as he could take Yanju home and get some start-up capital. With Yanju tied up here, Daniel wasn't worried Miho would pull any tricks, so he agreed. Before leaving, he exchanged a few words with Yanju. He claimed he'd bring Yanju back to him while also securing the money. Finally, he tried to embrace Yanju but was pushed away. Despite this, Miho wore a smug smile. Since Grandma Lee was still hospitalized, Miho moved into her home. Staring at the tracking data on his computer, Miho felt elated, because when he reached to hug Yanju earlier, he had secretly slipped a tracking device into her pocket. It turned out Hayami had sent someone to withdraw Sehun's share of the money in advance. Not only that, Hayami also learned that Nayeon had been killed by Sihun, and all these conversations had been recorded by Hayami. Sihun tried to explain to Hayami, but before he could speak, she covered his mouth. "You don't need to explain," she told him, "because you know nothing." At this point, the truth no longer mattered to Hayami. What mattered was that her daughter couldn't have a murderer for a father. What mattered was that her company couldn't bear any stain. She ordered Sihun to pretend he knew nothing. Soon after, Miho found her. Feigning great urgency, he claimed Yeonju had been kidnapped by gangsters. If the money wasn't returned, her life would be in danger. Yeonju had told him 3 billion won was held in Hayami's custody. He demanded Hayami return the money so he could rescue Yeonju. His performance was so convincing Miho's tears nearly spilled, but Hayami dismissed him with contempt and exposed his scheme immediately. She knew exactly how Miho had treated Yeonju in the past, so she flatly refused Miho's demand, and declared, "I have my own plans for Yeonju." Yeonju was blindfolded by several burly men and taken to a secluded private villa. Outside her room, the men took turns guarding the yard, daring not to relax for a moment. They were waiting for Miho to bring the ransom money to free Yeonju, but Yeonju knew full well Miho could never possibly find the money, so her only hope of escape lay in her own hands. To gather strength for her escape, she first slept. Upon waking, she meticulously surveyed every corner of the villa. She discovered all doors and windows were sealed shut. Outside the windows stood meter-high walls. Escaping from here seemed nearly impossible. Yet Yeonju still wanted to try. She found a fork and began scraping it back and forth along the edge of the iron window bars. Just then, a burly man entered. Yeonju feigned calmness, realizing it was merely a meal delivery person. After an unknown amount of time, Yeonju scraped away all the adhesive around the security window's edge. Then, using the fork, she removed every single screw holding the window in place. Fortunately, Yeonju was petite. Otherwise, she wouldn't have fit through. The guards never imagined Yeonju could escape from the room. Therefore, the door leading outside wasn't locked. Yeonju only had to push the door twice before it swung open. By the time anyone noticed, Yeonju had already run several miles. Exhausted, she spotted a car approaching. She dashed into the middle of the road and flagged it down. To her astonishment, the person stepping out was her best friend, Hayami. It turned out Hayami had already sent someone to repay Daniel, and had informed Hayami's people of Yeonju's location. As Hayami explained everything to Yeonju, Taejun arrived, but Daniel called his men to teach them a lesson. Amidst the chaotic brawl, Miho arrived with another man. Without hesitation, the man got out and joined the fight, helping Taejun break free. Meanwhile, Miho took advantage of the chaos to reverse his car and speed away. Despite outsiders smashing her vehicle, Hayami showed no fear. Seizing the moment, she floored the accelerator and sped off. Cut to Hayami delivering Yeonju straight to the airport. She urged Yeonju to flee the country immediately, promising to transfer funds. Not much, but enough to lie low. Yet Yeonju refused. Yeonju approached Miho, proposing they collaborate to recover the stolen money. Daniel received orders from Donghyuk to meet at a designated location and burn all the recovered cash. Upon learning this, Pete relayed the location to Hayami. Hayami instructed Myunchul to simply observe Donghyuk's appearance, repeatedly warning him not to do anything foolish. It turned out Myunchul's wife had committed suicide after Donghyuk swindled all her money. Hayami feared Myunchul might lose control and seek revenge upon seeing Donghyuk. After Myunchul left, Hayami relayed this information to Yeonju. Yeonju had previously promised Hayami she'd share any money-related updates. The quid pro quo for Hayami was that Yeonju would take the blame for Sihun's role in Nayeon's death. So Miho and Yeonju also quietly arrived at the location where Daniel and Donghyuk were meeting. Miho had Yeonju wait outside as he went in alone to figure out how to retrieve the money. Daniel was dumping 2 sacks of cash onto the floor. He then poured a bucket of gasoline over the bills. He then pulled out a lighter, preparing to ignite it. But at that moment, 3 people were lying in ambush around him. One was Miho, one was Taejun, and the other was Hayami's confidant, Myunchul. Each had come here with different motives. After Daniel set the money ablaze, a figure in black suddenly appeared and fired 2 shots directly at him. Donghyuk's men then began eliminating everyone present. In the ensuing chaos, Myunchul was hit by 2 bullets. Miho had hidden well and escaped unscathed. seizing my uncle's gun in the process. Just then, Taejun arrived outside the factory building. Daniel's men had all been eliminated. Sure enough, upon opening the trunk, the 3 suitcases were inside. Taejun was preoccupied inspecting the cash inside, unaware of the danger slowly closing in. He knew Yeonju's purpose for coming here. After a moment's thought, Taejun replied, "Hurry up and take it. This place is dangerous." Staring at the 3 suitcases of cash, Yeonju seemed utterly possessed. The moment Yeonju unfastened the chains securing the suitcases, Daniel knocked her to the ground. Though shot twice, Daniel still clung to hope he could escape with the money. After briefly regaining consciousness, Yeonju grabbed a dagger and slashed a tire on Daniel's car. Driven mad by the money that didn't belong to her, Yeonju was consumed by obsession. Miho, who had just escaped from the factory, happened upon Daniel driving away. He spotted the 3 suitcases of cash in the trunk. Miho immediately jumped into his car and gave chase. Daniel believed he could escape with the money, but he underestimated the severity of his injuries. His consciousness was already beginning to blur. Moreover, as soon as the car hit the highway, the tire went flat. This caused the vehicle to lose control and crash into a concrete barrier on the side. Dong-hyuk had also caught up by then and ordered his men to douse the suitcases with gasoline. Once the money was burned, the police would have no evidence to arrest him. But before they could light the fire, Dong-hyuk's men were shot down by Miho, who had caught up. Miho then aimed his gun at Dong-hyuk. Ignoring Miho, Dong-hyuk flung the lighter toward the suitcase. He swiftly drew his own gun and shot Miho in the shoulder. Unexpectedly, Miho, already on the ground, fired back, hitting Dong-hyuk in the abdomen. Dong-hyuk collapsed and lost consciousness. Miho urgently dragged the burning suitcase away. After extinguishing the flames, he discovered the money inside remained untouched. To claim the entire sum for himself, he devised a plan. He dumped all the cash onto his own vehicle. Then he tossed the empty suitcase beside the burning car. This way, no one would pursue the money further. But he forgot one crucial thing. He hadn't fired 2 more shots at Dong-hyuk. Dong-hyuk's gunshot wound wasn't fatal. Upon waking, he removed the ring from his own finger and placed it on the hand of his subordinate. He intended to create the illusion of his own death. No one knew what schemes were brewing within his mind. Dong-hyuk, wounded by the gunshot, collapsed after walking only a few hundred meters. By chance, Yeonju, who had been chasing after him, discovered him, facing the severely injured man before her. Yeonju hesitated. Should she save this man first, or pursue her money? In that moment, she recalled Taiwa's death. Though calling an ambulance had been too late then, she still hadn't dialed emergency services. She refused to bear the guilt of failing to help again, so she lifted the man into her car, preparing to take him to the hospital. Passing Daniel's burning vehicle, Yeonju stared at the 3 suitcases reduced to ashes, her heart filled with bitter resentment. Just then, Dong-hyuk, who had been unconscious, woke up and clearly saw Yeonju's face. He asked her what her name was. Yeonju then took Dong-hyuk to the hospital. The next day, after the bullet was removed, Dong-hyuk seized the chance to escape from the underground garage. After getting the money, Miho first repaid the high-interest loans he had taken out. Then he bought himself his favorite car model. He then paid full price for a luxury apartment, and finally treated himself to an expensive new outfit. Staring at 3 boxes brimming with cash, his mind filled with visions of a glorious future. But the seemingly clever Miho had actually dug his own grave, because the serial numbers on the bills were consecutive. Any large purchase would easily trace back to him. Before he could finish his glass of wine, the doorbell rang. Sensing trouble, Miho quickly locked the door, but the visitors arrived armed with bolt cutters. They barged in and struck Miho's leg with an iron bar. Before he could process this sudden nightmare, he was plunged into an unforeseeable horror. Miho's actions were truly reckless. Only upon seeing Dong-hyuk did he realize he was finished. He kept apologizing, begging Dong-hyuk to spare him. Dong-hyuk only demanded he answer one simple question to be forgiven. When he learned Dong-hyuk had sought out Yeonju solely to repay a debt, he immediately revealed Yeonju's location without hesitation. Miho was then taken to a remote mountain. They stuffed him into a burlap sack and knocked him unconscious with a shovel. After burying him, everyone left. After an unknown amount of time, Miho managed to crawl out of the 2-meter deep pit. Emerging, he gasped for fresh air. Those who buried him never imagined he could actually climb out. Hours earlier, when captured at the hotel, he'd secretly slipped a kitchen knife into his sleeve, and the sack placed over his head before burial? That very sack had provided him a sliver of breathing room. It gave him the chance to cut through the ropes with the knife and crawl free. Miho's life was truly resilient. After escaping, he happened upon a passing truck. He flagged it down and managed to get away. Back home, Miho did only two things. First, he downed half a carton of milk, then collapsed on the floor for a nap. Early the next morning, he headed to Grandma Lee's place to find Yeonju. While waiting at a traffic light, he spotted Yeonju. Just then, a luxury car pulled up beside her. As Miho watched the man step out, he suddenly recognized him as the mastermind, Dong Hyuk. Yeonju was shot by Raebo while protecting Taejun. This time, Miho truly felt heartbroken for Yeonju. He genuinely cried, weeping bitterly. Meanwhile, Dong Hyuk beside him had completely lost his mind. He raved about killing everyone there and fired another shot at Yeonju, but this bullet was blocked by Taejun. Fortunately, it only grazed Taejun's shoulder. Now, only Miho remained standing. He charged at Dong Hyuk with a roar, using his body to shield the gun barrel. A gunshot echoed immediately. Though shot, he gritted his teeth against the pain and aimed the gun at Dong Hyuk. Dong Hyuk staggered to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the city he once trampled underfoot. He couldn't believe he'd been destroyed by these nobodies. Beside him, Taejun picked up the gun, ready to avenge his brother. But Yeonju stopped him. The gun was in his hand. Pulling the trigger would bring revenge. Yet for Yeonju and his fallen brother, reason ultimately overcame vengeance. Taejun lowered the gun and declared to Dong Hyuk, "I'll personally drag you to prison." By then, Miho was near death. In his final moments, he whispered words to Yeonju. Yeonju never imagined Miho would sacrifice himself to save her. They had indeed once loved each other. But Miho had also subjected Yeonju to prolonged domestic violence. Such abuse could never be forgiven. Yet Miho's act of atonement could also be seen as a form of repentance for his violence. After Miho's death, the ambulance arrived promptly. Yeonju was not in critical condition. After recuperating for a while, she planned to leave the city. Staring at her ticket to the United States, Yeonju's thoughts were consumed by Taejun. She could have traveled to this place with him, but Taejun had refused. Perhaps this was fate. Fortunately, Taejun arrived just in time. Yeonju first congratulated him on regaining his position as a detective. Then she told him she would wait for him on that island. But the police uniform Taejun wore seemed to reveal the answer already. Without looking back, Yeonju headed toward security. Yet after just a few steps, Taejun caught up. He offered no clear commitment, but knowing Yeonju's nature, she would wait forever. Thus their first intimate encounter ended there. Even by the finale, it remained unclear whether Taejun ever went to find Yeonju.